The family's old townhouse had been passed down for generations, but no one had climbed into the attic for decades. Covered in dust, with boards that creaked with every step, and the air thick with mold and time. That place was a forgotten capsule, as if everything there had stopped in another era. It was on a cloudy autumn afternoon that Lucas, a young history student, decided to explore the environment during a visit to the house he inherited from his grandfather. At first, I just wanted to find something interesting to show my friends, but I could never have imagined what I was about to discover. As he dragged old boxes and blew thick layers of dust from objects covered in yellowed cloth, a wooden chest in the dark corner caught his attention. Unlike the other boxes, it seemed carefully stored. It wasn't piled up or forgotten. It had a rusty lock and an almost illegible inscription engraved on the lid, KP-1943. With some effort, Lucas forced the lock with an old tool and heard a metallic click. The trunk opened, giving off the smell of old paper mixed with damp wood. Inside there were several items that appeared to belong to a military man: a folded uniform, medals, a canteen, black and white photos of a young man with a firm expression, and a thick hardcover notebook, covered in leather, darkened by age. The notebook seemed ordinary at first glance, but upon leafing through it, Lucas realized that it was a war diary. The first pages were brief notes, perhaps everyday reports, but the handwriting became more careful and intimate on the following pages. And then, something different appeared between them: a folded sheet, with old fold marks, and a name written in cursive in the top corner. To E.L. Upon opening the letter, Lucas felt a chill. The words written there were not just historical records, they were words of love, deep and poetic feelings, written by someone who was facing war, but whose heart was elsewhere. The content of the letter was intense, passionate. It wasn't a simple declaration, it was a confession of longing, of hope, and of fear. The soldier said he wrote every night, even though he didn't know if those words would ever be read. He said that, although he was surrounded by the horror of war, it was his love for E.L. that kept him going. Intrigued, Lucas returned to the diary and began to leaf through it more carefully. He discovered that there were other letters hidden between the pages, all addressed to this mysterious E.L. None had been sent. They were there, like silent treasures, saved with the hope of a reunion that may never have happened. From that moment on, the attic was no longer just an old, dusty place. It was a sanctuary, a place where a heart had poured into words, hidden from the world. That chest now became a portal between the past and the present, between war and tenderness, between death and the permanence of love. Lucas went down the stairs with the diary in his hands, feeling the symbolic weight of each page. He sat down in the old living room, where the pendulum clock still ticked the hours slowly, and continued reading. The house seemed too quiet. Even the wind that hit the windows seemed to respect the moment. He still didn't know the full name of the author of the letters, nor who E.L. was, but at that moment that seemed secondary. What mattered was what was there, a hidden love, perhaps never revealed, preserved for decades in the silence of a diary kept by a man who perhaps had never returned from the war. What if the author had not survived? What if those letters never reached their destination? What if E.L. had gone through life without knowing that she was so loved? Questions began to arise, and with them, a certainty. Lucas couldn't just put that back. I needed to find out the story behind those words. I needed to know who the man was who wrote each line with his soul, and who the woman was who inspired so much feeling. Thus began a journey, not just for answers, but for reconnection. The story of the letters was not yet over, and Lucas was determined to write the next chapter. With the diary in hand and his mind full of questions, Lucas couldn't sleep that night. The soldier's words echoed like whispers in the silence of the room. Even if I disappear into the world, may my words find you. This was more than a war story. It was a story of the soul, written with ink, longing, and hope. But who was that man? Where did so much love come from? Lucas needed to know. The next morning he returned to the attic and looked through the trunk more carefully. Underneath the folded uniform was a small, worn leather wallet. Inside, he found old, yellowed, military documents. There it was: Konstantin Petrov, born in 1918, infantry soldier, deployed on missions on the Eastern Front of the Second World War. The wallet also had a faded photograph. He was the same man as in the letters, a strong face, a serious look, but with a gleam deep in his eyes. Beside him, a woman smiled. They were together, hugging each other in an open field. Could it be her? E.L. Lucas knew that, at that time, many soldiers guarded their letters and souvenirs with more care than their own combat belongings. They were the anchor in the midst of chaos, the bridge between the ruined present and the life they one day dreamed of recovering. But what made that diary special was the fact that it was hidden. The soldier didn't want anyone to find him. It was personal. It was too intimate to share. Until now, the name Konstantin Petrov sounded foreign. But when searching through city records and old family documents, Lucas found a revealing clue. His grandfather, an immigrant from Eastern Europe after the war, had brought few belongings. Among them, the surname Petrov, that made his heart race. Could it be possible that the soldier was your direct ancestor? An uncle, maybe even a brother of your grandfather? He determined to find out everything. Lucas went to the local registry office and requested access to civil records. With the help of a friendly employee curious about history, they crossed out names, dates, and places of birth. Within days, confirmation came. Konstantin was, in fact, Lucas's grandfather's younger brother. He had come with him from Europe, but had disappeared in combat before he could return. His name was among those who disappeared on a mission, without a body, without a funeral, without a goodbye. That added an even deeper layer to the discovery. The letters Lucas had found were not just historical relics, they were part of his story. He was reading the last words of a relative who may have died dreaming of meeting the love of his life. And, perhaps even more painful, a man who never knew that his words would one day be read by someone in his own family. Konstantin's handwriting was firm, elegant, even artistic. It wasn't the kind of hurried lyrics you'd expect from someone living in the trenches. Every line seemed written with time, care, and feeling. This showed something precious. Even during the war, he set aside a moment of the day to be just. With E.L., it was like a ritual, writing to her like someone who breathes, like someone who needs to live. Further into the diary, Lucas found a curious passage. The soldier mentions that, if he didn't survive, he hoped that someday someone would find that diary. Not so that the world would know what he experienced, but so that the love I carried would not disappear with me. It was as if Konstantin knew that his story would not end there, even if the body fell. He believed in the eternity of words. And now, decades later, his words had found someone, a reader, a link. Lucas began to wonder about the context in which those letters were written. Studying the excerpts from the diary in more depth, he realized that Konstantin was on the front line of decisive battles. He spoke of the intense cold, colleagues who did not return, food shortages, and contradictory orders from superiors. But most of all, he talked about E.L. for memory of her voice. The last time he saw her, the promise he'd made to return. The diary was, at the same time, a testimony of war and a reliquary of love. And Konstantin, more than a soldier, was a passionate man trying to maintain his humanity amid the inhumanity of conflict. The handwriting, which at first seemed just beautiful, now carried another meaning. It was resistance. It was the way he kept himself together. Writing was his way of continuing to fight, even when everything around him said otherwise. With tears in his eyes, Lucas closed the diary that night, but he knew that this was just the beginning. Now that I knew who Konstantin was, I needed to find out who was this woman capable of inspiring such devotion. And, above all, did she know ever that she was so loved? When Lucas turned another page of Konstantin's diary, he found something different. The soldier's handwriting seemed calmer, more fluid, as if that day he had written with a lighter heart. The date at the top was a common day, without reference to battles, and the text did not speak of combats, marches, or orders received. It was a letter, and it was the first that, without a doubt, addressed directly the mysterious E.L. today. The sky dawned clear. For a few minutes, I forgot that I was on a warfield. I heard a bird sing. I closed my eyes, and, for a moment, I saw your face. Lucas read in a low voice, as if he feared breaking the intimacy of that moment. The letter's setting was contrasting, a warfield, and, within it, a heart loving delicately. Konstantin wrote as if he were in a garden, and not surrounded by the constant fear of death. The war was still around. Yes, he was not ignoring it. But in that role, at that moment, she was not the protagonist. It was love that screamed the loudest. The letter continued with memories of a brief meeting, perhaps the only 1. Between him and El, the tone was melancholy and hopeful at the same time. He described the sound of her laugh, the way her eyes moved when he said something that made her nervous. He remembered the color of her dress, the smell of her hair, things that only those who truly loved would be able to keep even in the midst of destruction. What sustains me is the memory of what we experienced, even though it was brief. It was just a few weeks, maybe days, but you stayed with me as if you were part of my body. And if one day I don't come back, I want you to know, every night I write to you. I can't always send it. Sometimes, I don't even know if you're still there, but I keep writing. Those words were like a silent punch to Lucas's chest. It was the first declaration of a love that resisted, even in the face of uncertainty. Konstantin didn't know if she was still alive. He didn't know if she was expecting him. Maybe he didn't even know if she had loved him with the same intensity. But that didn't stop him from writing. Each letter was an attempt to keep the bond alive, an offering, a ritual of remembrance. What impressed Lucas was not just the strength of the feeling, but the fact that it flourished in an inhospitable environment. Konstantin wrote about beauty amid the ugliness of war. He described the sound of the leaves in the wind, the shine of the moon, the taste of stale bread that reminded him of a simple dinner they had together. Small details gained grandeur way. Seen through the prism of nostalgia, Lucas, as a historian, had always studied war letters, but none seemed as personal, as charged with humanity, as those. There were no patriotic speeches or military strategies there. There was silence, surrender, the desire to return home, and most of all, there was a man in pieces trying to hold himself together through love. In one of the excerpts, Konstantin said, "Today, I saw a companion die with the name of the woman he loved on his lips. It was as if he left a last note for her, even if she never heard it. I write so I don't die in silence, so that, even if I fall, my voice will echo in her hands one day. Writing is what I have left." Lucas closed his eyes. This was not fiction. Those words were written with the sound of bombs in the background, with the blood of the companions mixed with the earth, with the cold cutting into the bones. It was love sown to pain. It was poetry created in the mud. In the last part of the letter, Konstantin mentioned a recurring dream, him coming home, climbing the wooden steps to the porch, and her waiting at the door, smiling. The scene was described in so much detail that it looked like a portrait. Maybe he never experienced that in reality, but in his mind, that reunion happened every night, and that was what kept him alive. If one day you receive these words, you will know that I loved you with the strength of someone who faced hell and still chose tenderness. I write to you so I don't forget that I am human, and you are the part of me that reminds me of that. Lucas closed the diary carefully. That first letter revealed the beginning of something great. It was the seed of a love story that would resist time, bullets, distance, perhaps even death. And now, he knew that the journey wasn't just about finding out what happened to Konstantin. It was also about understanding who this woman was who received so much love and never knew. Or did you know, and never respond? There were many letters still to be read, and Lucas knew the next ones would reveal more about the depth of that feeling, and, possibly, about the fate of both. With the diary resting on the table and the letters spread out like holy relics, Lucas felt that something greater was enveloping him. What had started as a simple curiosity now seemed like a calling. Konstantin's words were not just confessions of a man in love, they were testimonies of a story that time tried to silence, but that, somehow, survived. Hidden between aged pages, each new letter discovered added a piece to an emotional but incomplete puzzle. Some were dated, others were not. There were entire letters, but also loose sections, torn pages, sentences that began and ended abruptly, as if they had been interrupted by a scream, a gunshot, or a warning siren. The diary itself, although dense, was fragmented. Some pages had been torn out, others were smudged by humidity or age, and in many, the handwriting started out firm and ended shaky, as if the soldier had been stopped by the brutal reality of war. Lucas started to organize everything carefully. He created a system with labels, approximate dates, and tried to create a chronology. And it was in this process that he noticed something disturbing. Some of the letters seemed to have been written with the clear intention of being hidden, not only because they were never sent, but because they were folded inside sheets glued to the diary or sewn into the lining of the cover. Konstantin was hiding those words from someone, or everyone. This raised a painful question. Why hide love? Would it be a prohibited relationship? Would El be compromised? Would Konstantin be watched? Or was it just the nature of war, which allowed no room for feelings? Lucas reread the excerpts, looking for clues. In one of the letters, he found something suggestive. If this diary ever falls into the wrong hands, let them know. I didn't just fight for the flag, I fought for it. And if that is treason, then condemn me for loving more than I bear. That excerpt left him silent for minutes. There was something there that transcended love. There was anger, perhaps a feeling of guilt. Something wasn't entirely clear, but it was clear that Konstantin didn't want anyone to know what he felt, except El. And yet, most of the letters hadn't even been sent. He seemed to keep everything to himself, as if his pain were a secret too valuable to share. And then, between the middle pages of the diary, Lucas found a different letter. It was written on another sheet, light brown in color, thicker. The lyrics were the same, but the tone changed. It wasn't just poetic, it was almost desperate. In it, Konstantin said, "Today, I was interrogated. Someone found one of my letters in my backpack. I don't know who it was, or why. I disguised it. I lied. I said it was my invention, fiction to kill time. I believed they would leave me alone. But I realized that there are too many eyes around. I'll have to hide it better, maybe even stop. But how can I stop writing to her, if it's the only way to continue existing?" Lucas understood. Those letters were at risk, not only from being destroyed, but from putting the author himself in danger. War, in addition to being brutal and inhumane, was also a place where even feelings became threats. To show love was to be vulnerable, and vulnerability was not something accepted on battlefields. Over time, the excerpts became scarcer. Between one letter and another, entire pages of silence appeared. Konstantin began to write less. In some entries, he said he was too tired, or that the fighting had been intense. Sometimes he simply left out sentences like, "I couldn't do it today, but I thought about her all day. Every shot I heard, I imagined it would be the last. I thought of her in every one. I'm scared, not of dying, but of her never knowing I existed for her." Lucas realized that this story was not a traditional romance. It was not a story with a structured beginning, middle, and end. It was a mosaic of memories, fears, and promises, fragments of a heart divided between the hope of living and the certainty of imminent death. And precisely for this reason, it is so human, so profound. Time had tried to erase that story. The worn pages, faded letters, rust stains, and the smell of abandonment proved this. But love, however hidden, survived. He escaped censorship, crossfire, and oblivion. It was there, and now, in Lucas's hands, he was reborn. It was as if Konstantin himself, decades after writing those words, was still saying, "Don't let them forget me. Don't let her think she was never loved." And even though the answers were still half completed, Lucas knew he was on the right path. There was a lot left to discover. But those fragments, even incomplete, already told more than many entire stories. If you've made it this far, you've already felt the weight of the words that time tried to erase. You're realizing, as we are, that this story isn't just about war, it's about everything that endures even when the world falls apart. Therefore, if this narrative has already touched your heart, I ask you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This shows us that stories like this deserve to be told, remembered, and never forgotten. And if you can, share this video with someone who believes that true love crosses time and absence. Now, take a deep breath and get ready, because in the next chapter, you're going to find out the most intense letter Konstantin ever wrote, a promise made with the soul, between blood, mud, and hope. What he reveals will move you. Among the most worn pages of the diary, there was one that looked different from all the others. It wasn't just yellow, she was stained. It wasn't paint or rust. It was something darker, more intimate. Lucas stopped. He carefully ran his fingers over that mark that seemed to have passed through time. Beside it, a letter, folded more carefully than all the others, sealed with red wax cracked by time. On the side of the diary page, a sentence written in shaky handwriting. "If this is the last, may she forgive me for everything I dreamed of and didn't live by her side." Lucas felt his body shiver. The following letter was different. It didn't start with a date, not even with the traditional "my dear" that filled the previous ones. She was direct, intense, almost desperate. It was a kind of emotional testament. "Today, I saw death up close, closer than ever. We were on a mission in the forest. When we were ambushed, half the unit was shot down. The ground shook with the explosions, and smoke covered the sky as if the world had ended. I bled, bled, and I thought I wouldn't come back. And, in the midst of the pain, I thought of you, of what I didn't live, of what I promised you, and I made, perhaps, the truest promise of my life. It was as if Konstantin was dictating his own farewell, his heart beating between his teeth. With each line, he desperately tried to hold on to life, not for himself, but for what he would leave behind. I promised that I would come back, that I would find you, that I would give you the life we dreamed of in secret, between simple dinners and promises whispered in nights too short. And even if my body doesn't resist, even if this letter doesn't reach your hands in any time, I want you to know, my love for you doesn't end with me. It goes with the wind, with the earth, with time, but it never dies. It was as if, at that moment, among the shadows of the jungle and the screams of the wounded, Konstantin had used his last strength to leave something immortal, not a story, not a memory, but a promise. Lucas imagined the scene, the wounded soldier, with his hands shaking, using the remaining minutes to write that letter, maybe dirty with mud, with blood, with blurry eyes, and even so, firm in the purpose of loving until the end. This wasn't just a diary anymore. It was a reliquary of faith, an act of resistance against death, and then, a final excerpt. If I don't return, and one day this letter is found, I hope that whoever reads it understands. I loved more than I lived, and I dreamed more than the war allowed me. May she know, even in silence, that I was hers, until the last second. Lucas closed his eyes. The letter was brief, but filled with an intensity that suffocated. The red wax used to seal the envelope, perhaps mixed with blood, now seemed sacred. It was the mark of an oath made not just with words, but with pain, and, above all, with love. The writing in the letter was shakier than in the previous ones. There were smudges, perhaps from tears, or maybe the rain. It was impossible to know. But everything indicated that that moment was the most critical in Konstantin's life, and, at the same time, the most true. Lucas remained silent for long minutes. I had read dozens of old letters, from soldiers, from separated lovers, from children who ever returned, but nothing compared to that. That letter was not meant to be read by anyone. It was a delivery, an act of blind trust, a dive into what is most human, the fear of death and the desire to remain, in some way, in someone's heart. That was, without a doubt, the purest promise Luke had ever witnessed. And then, as a historian, he knew that letter needed to be delivered, even though El was no longer alive, even if no one else understood what was behind it. That promise could not remain forgotten, sealed in a forgotten diary in an attic. I needed to touch the world, because that's what Konstantin wanted. May your last word of love not die on paper, but it would come. Somehow, it would arrive. Lucas was now not just looking for answers. He had a mission. With the letter still in his hands, Lucas wondered how many feelings had been buried with the soldiers who never returned. That promise written by Konstantin, so visceral and definitive, never reached El, and that changed everything. The woman he loved so much may have spent her life without knowing how much she was expected, desired, and adored by a man in the midst of war. And that hurt more than any visible wound. Lucas looked at the letter as if he were facing something sacred, and, in a way, it was. This wasn't just paper that had aged for decades. It was a silent testimony, an echo of love that never had a voice, that was never heard, that never found a response. He tried to imagine what El's life would have been like after the war. Did she wait? Did you receive any news? Or did she, in the face of silence, understand that he was gone forever and moved on with her life, even with her heart stuck in something unfinished? The war silenced millions of love stories. It interrupted promised kisses, affections under construction, families that never formed. But few of these stories left traces as vivid as that of Konstantin and El. Their love did not fade. It remained there, so into the pages of a diary, hidden between the folds of time, waiting, as he waited for her, for the chance to finally be revealed. As he organized the contents of the trunk again, Lucas noticed that the letters, even those that seemed incomplete, formed a continuous line of feeling. It was as if Konstantin knew he couldn't send any of them, but still refused to stop writing. It was his way of keeping the connection alive, of not going crazy amid the inhumanity of war, to keep El close, even if she never knew. In one of the last entries in the diary, there was a sentence written almost illegibly: "If I can't reach you, may my words do." That was the essence of it all. The certainty that neither physical absence, nor distance, nor the silence of death could stop love from trying. It was a love that screamed in the dark, even without knowing if anyone would hear. A silent love, yes, but full of strength, full of soul. Lucas found himself overcome by a strange feeling, a mixture of grief and gratitude, a fight for Konstantin, for El, for everything that didn't happen, and gratitude for having been chosen, even if by chance, to open that diary and release everything that had been locked away for so long. Those words were no longer prisoners. They had found eyes to read them, and now, perhaps, the world would know them too. But there was another question that bothered Lucas more and more. Why were those letters never delivered? He went back to the diary, rereading each entry. In one of them, written weeks before the letter sealed with red wax, there was a clue. "I tried to trust a platoon mate. I asked him to take a letter to her, in case something happened to me, but he disappeared. They said he was transferred, but no one could say where. Maybe it was a mistake to trust. Maybe it's better to hide everything. Maybe she never read any of this, but I keep writing. For me, for her, for who we still are." That note hurt. It revealed not only abandonment, but Konstantin's frustrated effort in trying to ensure that his voice reached El, the missing companion, the uncertain fate, and the decision to hide everything out of fear, out of precaution, out of disappointment, a forced silence, a silent love, not by choice, but by necessity. Lucas felt more and more involved. He wasn't just a reader, it was the missing link, the bridge between the promise and the possibility of delivery. What Konstantin feared so much, that his words would never find his beloved, was, in some way, being repaired. But how can we find El now, so many years later? It was possible that she was no longer alive, or that he had changed his name, city, country. But something told Lucas that that story still had something to reveal. That, somehow, the woman who inspired so many letters still needed to hear or remember how much she was loved. And even if she could no longer read it with her own eyes, the world needed to know. Because a love like that doesn't go away, it doesn't disappear. Don't die in silence, he just waits. How the letters waited, as Konstantin expected. How, perhaps, silently, waited El. It was inevitable. Amid so many passionate letters and confessions, Konstantin's diary would, at some point, begin to describe the horrors of the battlefield in more detail. Until then, he avoided direct reports from the front, perhaps as a way of protecting El and himself from the harshest memories. But at that point in the diary, something changes. Words take on a different weight. The love is still present, but it is as if it is being written among rubble, almost suffocated by smoke, pain and fear. Lucas leafed through the pages carefully, but from then on, the stories were no longer spaced out. It was as if Konstantin needed to write everything as quickly as possible, as if he knew he wouldn't have much time. The day is recorded as November 17th, 1944. The tone of the handwriting is urgent. Today the world was silent for seconds. Before exploding, Konstantin describes that his unit was sent into a densely forested region, close to the enemy line. The mission was strategic, to regain a position that had been lost days before. But everything went wrong. They were surrounded. The enemy was waiting for them. It was an ambush. He writes of the sounds, a rumble that seemed to come not from without, but from within, as if the heart had ruptured even before the explosion. He reports that he ran between trees while screams of injured companions echoed through the branches. Every step was a wait, every second an eternity. He remembers falling twice, the second time hit by shrapnel in the leg, but he kept crawling, hiding behind a burnt log. The most devastating part, however, is not the description of the battle, but what it represents. In that entry, Konstantin does not write like a soldier. He writes as a man who begins to accept the possibility of death. If I die here, it won't be for lack of fighting, but I will die with a name stuck in my throat. Hers, only hers. Those lines were almost a whisper in the chaos. Amid the explosions and despair, he still thought about El. It was for her that he fought, not for glory, not for ideologies, but for what he had promised to return. Lucas read with a heavy heart. The scene felt alive. It was as if he could see Konstantin, covered in mud, pressing the wound with one hand and holding the diary with the other, writing between his trembling fingers, determined to record his last words, even if no one found them. After a brief silence in the notes, the diary returns with a new entry. From 2 days later, I was found by civilians. They dragged me to an abandoned house, treated my wound with dirty cloths and prayers. I didn't want to sleep, afraid I would never wake up, and when I closed my eyes, it was her I saw. These lines revealed that Konstantin survived that battle, at least for now. But something had changed. He was different. The war had broken him irreversibly. His next words are marked by a tone of farewell, even when he does not declare it openly. I don't know if I'll go back. I don't know if I'll walk again, but I still write, because that's what keeps me whole. Lucas realized that that moment was the turning point in the narrative. The battle hadn't just destroyed men, it had undone plans, silenced dreams, altered destinies. And for Konstantin, she represented the point at which the dream of returning began to seem impossible. He didn't stop writing, but now his words held more pain than hope. Still, the love for El remained intact. In the midst of destruction, he called it a port, a refuge, a last thought before the dark. What the battle didn't take away was her memory. That was what was left, and maybe that was what kept him alive. In the days following the battle, the diary contains more spaced-out notes. The writing is noticeably slower, as if each word were a fight against exhaustion, fever, perhaps infection. Konstantin seemed to be writing with what little strength he had left, but even so, he insists, I still have something to say. I still have love to deliver. Lucas closed the diary for a moment, looking at the ceiling of the room where he read all those memories. I had the feeling that this story wasn't just being read, it was being relived. Konstantin had gone through the war with his body torn apart, but with his soul in a state of vigil, and all for one reason, to keep alive the only human thing he had left, love. That battle had changed everything, the destination, the body, the way, but not the feeling. Lucas had already read dozens of letters, fragments and entries from Konstantin's diary, but there was one envelope that remained closed, almost intact, stored in the false bottom of the trunk. It was different from the others, more robust, sealed with cracked wax and wrapped in a faded red ribbon. Next to him, inside the same hidden compartment, a single sheet with just one sentence written by hand, in shaky handwriting, "Only open if I don't come back." Lucas's heart accelerated. He hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just a letter. It was an intimate testament, a last gesture, a farewell that perhaps had never been read by anyone, not even by El. That letter had a different weight, not just for its shape, but for its silence. It was a goodbye prepared in time, but never delivered. A goodbye sealed by uncertainty, fear, and courage of someone who knew that tomorrow might not come. With careful hands, Lucas broke the ancient seal. The sound was soft, almost reverent. When he opened the paper, a small flower petal fell out, dry, almost powdery, perhaps kept there as a memory of a moment Konstantin never wanted to forget. The lyrics, that time, were slow, spaced out, as if each line was written between one tear and another. And there it was. My dear El, if you're reading this letter, it's because I couldn't come back. Forgive me. Forgive me not for leaving, but for leaving with you the loneliness that I feared most. It wasn't by choice. It wasn't for lack of love. It was the world. It was time that betrayed us. Lucas stopped for a moment. This wasn't just a goodbye letter. It was an outburst, a loving lament from someone who fought as long as he could, but who knew that the end was perhaps inevitable. I wrote to you every day, even when there was no paper, even when there was only dust, blood, and silence. I wrote to you with my eyes, with my thoughts, with what was left of me. I never knew if my letters reached you. Maybe not. Maybe none crossed the ocean between us. But if this one ever reached your hands, may it carry everything I was unable to say in life. Lucas felt as if he was invading something sacred, but he also understood that this was his mission, to be the link between that man and the world he left behind. I dreamed of the day I would meet you again, when I would touch your face and say, without words, that every beat of my heart was yours, that even between bombs, the sound I most wanted to hear was your laugh. I didn't have the chance to give you children, a house, sunny Sundays. I only gave you absences. And yet, I became yours every day. I hope you lived, that you were happy, that you loved, even without me." This part of the letter was like a blow to Lucas's chest. It was the kind of love that wanted the good of the other, even in failure, even in separation, even death, a love that didn't charge, that didn't bind, that freed. If you found someone, I hope he loved you like I did, that he noticed the sparkle in your eyes, the way you bite your lip when you're nervous, the way you talk with your hands without realizing it. I hope he brought you flowers, and that he listened to you. But if time passed and no one called you mine anymore, know that even absent, even dead, I was yours. I always have been. And if this letter is all that's left of me, that I'm at peace, because someone gave you my heart. Even if late, even if silently, at the end of the letter, a detail, in smaller, almost invisible letters, "Don't cry for me. Read me as if I were there, lying next to you, as if my hands were in yours, as if there was still time to say what I never said. Because, somehow, there is still time to feel." Lucas closed his eyes. He was faced with the most powerful letter he had ever read in his life, not for its construction, but for its delivery. It was the kind of love that disarms, that heals, and that remains even without reciprocity. Konstantin wrote his last letter with the certainty that it might never be read, and yet, he put everything he was there, everything I felt, all that was left. That was the last letter, and it wasn't just goodbye, it was an offering, a legacy of love, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, there is beauty, that even in the end, there can be poetry. Lucas knew that the next step now would be to find out who was El, and would she still be alive to receive that goodbye. After reading the last letter, Lucas was silent. There were no more pages to turn, no more envelopes hidden at the bottom of the trunk. The diary ended there, not with a period, but with a question suspended in the air. Who was El? The woman who inspired so many words, who sustained the soul of a soldier in the midst of the hell of war, remained shrouded in shadows. And this lack of answers now became Lucas's obsession. He returned to the attic. He searched every corner of the trunk, opened old boxes, searched photographs in search of initials, faces, clues. Among accounting notebooks, old certificates and school books, he found a brown envelope, without a stamp, with his grandfather's handwritten notes. It contained some family correspondence organized by name, and it was there, almost like an intervention of fate, that he found a birthday card signed with the initials El and the date. 1943. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, firm. The card said, "To KP, who even far away will always be my sweetest memory. With eternal affection, El." Lucas almost dropped the card from his hands. The connection was made. It existed, she replied. Maybe not often, maybe silently, but it existed. The feeling was not one-sided, and that changed everything. El was not just an idealized figure in the letters. It was real. It was present, at least at that time. But who was she? What is your full name? Where did he live? And why were Konstantin's letters never sent, even though he knew she might be waiting? The search for answers led Lucas to municipal records. He started with the list of longtime residents of the city. Nothing appeared with those initials. Afterwards, he searched for parish archives, where baptisms, marriages, and deaths were kept like relics of the past. It was there that he found something. Elena Luchinskaya, registered as a teacher, living in the same village, where her grandfather grew up, born in 1921, daughter of Russian immigrants, like the Petrov family. At the time of the war, she would have been around 22 years old. Everything clicked. The name was more than a clue. It was the key. Lucas spent days trying to find any mention of Elena. In old newspapers, he found a note dated 1947. Professor Elena Luchinskaya, honored for dedication to teaching during post-war years. The photograph was small, in black and white, but clear enough to show the outline of the face. He compared it to the old photo he had found next to Konstantin. It was her. There was no doubt. But then came the most painful question. Would she still be alive? Lucas searched registry offices, hospitals, death records. Nothing. No confirmation. At the same time, there were no recent records either. It was as if she had disappeared from time, from bureaucracy, from history. But something bothered him. What if she was alive, and nearby? It was then that he decided to followed the trail left by the address found in one of Elena's documents. The street still existed. The house too, although very different, renovated, with new paint and an iron gate. But when he knocked on the door, he was greeted by a friendly lady who said she had lived there for over 30 years. Lucas, frustrated, asked if he knew who had lived there before. The woman thought for a few moments and replied, "I remember that a lady lived alone here for a long time, very reserved, never married. Her name was Elena, a retired teacher. He left here about 10 years ago. He said he was going to live with a niece. I don't know if she's still alive, but I remember seeing her sitting in that rocking chair there, reading letters, always reading letters." That was like a punch to Lucas's gut. She kept the letters, perhaps the few he managed to receive, or perhaps those that were never delivered, but reached you in another way. And most poignant, she never married. Did he wait for Konstantin until the end? The woman in the house didn't remember her niece's name, but she decided to look for some old papers in the basement of the house that might have been left over from the move. Lucas thanked him, and, before leaving, he looked at the balcony. He imagined Elena there, already elderly, reading the words that kept Konstantin alive for so long. At that moment, Lucas was sure of something. Even though the reunion between the two never happened in life, there was a that persisted, a link that time has not broken. He now carried the mission of somehow delivering to that story the ending that the war tried to prevent. And although he didn't know where Elena was, or even if she still lived, he wouldn't give up. Because no one who was so loved should be forgotten, and no love so deep should be buried in silence. From the moment he found real traces of Elena Lushenskaya's existence, Lucas felt that Konstantin's story was no longer just a romantic memory kept on paper. It was a historical, emotional, and family enigma, something that required not only sensitivity, but persistence. And he was willing to go all the way, even if the path ahead was full of holes, gray areas, and silences that time had carefully constructed. That night, Lucas didn't sleep, poring over notes, civil records, and digitized pages of old newspapers. He drew imaginary lines between names, dates, and places. With each connection, a new question arose. With each piece of information, a void. Even though some clues pointed to Elena, there were still too many gaps. Who was the niece mentioned by the resident of the old house? Where had Elena lived after moving? And most of all, would she still be alive? Lucas resorted to what he had at hand. He picked up the birthday card found in his grandfather's envelope again and turned his attention to the return address. There was no street or full number, but there was a neighborhood name and the signature, E. Luchenskaya. With that, he went to the City Hall archives and requested access to records from the 1940s to 1980. It was a long process. The metal drawers of the public archives held files yellowed by age. Employees looked at him with disdain, as if he were just another curious person, a misplaced romantic. But Lucas knew, you only find those who refuse to give up looking. And then, among the typed files, he found a name that made his heart skip a beat. Elena Lushenskaya da Silva, record of change of address in 1987. Compound surname indicated that perhaps it had been legally adopted by another family, or that its signature had changed over the years, but it was her. The date of birth confirmed, 1921. The new address was in a neighboring city, just 2 hours away. Without thinking twice, Lucas took the car and left that same afternoon. The journey was silent. Each kilometer traveled seemed to reduce the distance between past and present, between two souls separated by decades of absence. Upon arriving in the city, Lucas went to the local registry office, and there again, he asked for access to the records, now with the certainty that he was very close. And there he found a new document, record of admission to a home for the elderly, dated 2015. The name, Elena Lushenskaya da Silva, resident of Asilo Snow, Miguel. Lucas felt a lump in his throat. It was possible, she could be alive. He could still be waiting, ... Or, perhaps, even without waiting for anyone else, he could still remember him. From Konstantin, from the letters of promises. Upon arriving at the place, he was greeted by a caring, kind but cautious lady. He explained the story calmly, showed the diary, the documents, the old photo, the letters. The caregiver listened to him attentively, her eyes shining with amazement and tenderness. "We do have a resident named Elena. He's been with us for almost 10 years. She is very quiet, but lucid. Read every day, mainly letters. The confirmation was like a breath of life. Lucas didn't know whether to cry, run, or scream. He wanted to see Elena right then, but was told to wait. The caregiver entered and, minutes later, returned with a slight smile. She said she would like to talk, but he asked to bring a letter, the last one. Lucas felt the weight of responsibility. With trembling hands, he took Konstantin's sealed letter from the envelope, the one that said, "Only open if I don't come back." The one that had never been read by the recipient, the one that now might finally be delivered. He entered the room slowly. Elena was sitting in an armchair near the window, white hair carefully combed, hands resting on the lap. The eyes, even when aged, are firm and attentive. When he saw Lucas with the envelope, something in his expression changed. A silent tear fell before any words were spoken. He approached and just said, "This is what was missing. He wrote to you, until the end." She held out her hands gently, as if receiving something too fragile to be touched in a hurry. He opened the envelope slowly. His eyes scanned each line as if he already knew what was written, as if, somehow, they had been waiting for this all their lives. When he finished reading, he looked at Lucas. The voice was low, firm, almost a whisper. "I knew, I always knew, but I had never read it with my eyes, only with the heart." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any words. Between records, gaps, and decades of oblivion, the truth finally emerged. The history that the war tried to erase had survived, not as a ruin, but as a living memory, like love that has stood the test of time. The room was simple, silent, almost sacred. Outside, the late afternoon painted the window with golden tones, as if the sun also wanted to witness that late reunion. On Elena's lap rested the letter that passed through decades to finally be read by whoever inspired it, and in her eyes, already marked by time, but still vivid, there was a glow that mixed amazement, longing, and a peace that was not easily seen in such tired faces. Lucas remained standing, respecting the moment. He knew there was something there that didn't belong to him, a space between two hearts that hadn't seen each other for more than 70 years, but that never stopped recognizing each other. It was as if, for a moment, time had retreated, as if war, distance, and death had been just temporary obstacles. The love was still there, whole, intact. Elena caressed the paper like someone touching a beloved face. It didn't say anything. It didn't cry uncontrollably. It was a mature, dignified silence, which only exists when the soul recognizes that something profound has just been completed. After a long time, she looked at Lucas and said, sweetly, "I waited for him, every morning. Then I learned to only expect him at night, and when too much time passed, I began to wait for him in silence, not with the eyes, but with the heart. I never knew he wrote it, but I always felt like he hadn't forgotten me." That confession disarmed Lucas. He understood now what it truly meant to transcend time. It wasn't just about staying alive in memory, it was existing even in absence. It was like being a living memory, even without having returned. It was having left roots in another heart. Elena then said that after the war, she only received an official letter from the army, reporting Konstantin's disappearance. They never knew what happened to him. No body was found, no objects returned. But for some reason, she never accepted that final point. Never married, he never left the country. He continued living in the same city, working as a teacher, writing letters that he never sent, as if somehow, somewhere, he could still receive them. Lucas asked if she kept any of these letters. She smiled, with a serene melancholy, and pointed to a wooden box in the corner of the room. Inside, dozens of them, all signed by Elena, all for Konstantin, written over the years, on birthdays, Christmases, unnamed dates. These were words that she launched into the world like someone planting seeds, even without being sure that it would rain. He opened some, the first, full of hope, the ones in the middle, full of absence, the last ones, full of longing and maturity. In one of them, dated 1978, she wrote, "If you still visit me in my dreams, it's because you haven't left me completely. There are still parts of you that live in me. And as long as that happens, you're here." Lucas was moved. This was more than a love story. It was a lesson in constancy, about permanence, about the conscious choice not to forget, to keep alive a promise made with the soul, even without witnesses, even without return. Those letters, both his and hers, were two rivers that ran parallel for a lifetime, and now they're in that simple room they finally met. As if, when read and heard, they sealed what time tried to deny, that love, when true, does not obey the limits of the clock. It doesn't end. It transforms, resists, settles into deep corners, and, sometimes, just waits for the right moment to blossom again. Elena took Konstantin's last letter and brought it to her lips. He kissed the paper with the delicacy of someone who knew that this gesture ended a cycle, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude, for the chance to have been loved so truly, for the proof, finally received, that I was not wrong in waiting. Now, he has arrived, she said. It took a while, but it arrived. Lucas, unable to contain his tears, just nodded. At that moment, he understood that his mission was not just to find the origin of those letters. It was to ensure that they fulfilled their destiny, that they weren't just words buried in a diary, but living feelings, transmitted, delivered, and that it happened. Konstantin's love for Elena survived the war, to death, to oblivion, and in the end, he found his way back, not as if it had never been interrupted, but as something that, even when interrupted, never stopped pulsing, because there are feelings that time cannot erase, and there are promises that, even written in the mud of war, endure as if they had been written in the heart itself. The delivery of the last letter seemed like the natural end of that journey. The reunion between Konstantin's words and Elena's heart poetically closed a story that had resisted war, distance, and time. But like every great story, there was one last surprise, a forgotten detail, a final piece. That would change everything, and Lucas was about to find her. 2 days after visiting the nursing home, he returned to the attic where it all began. I wanted to close that cycle with reverence. He went up with the same caution, now with a completely different perception of the place. Where before there was only dust and old objects, he now saw an altar of memories. The trunk, the uniform, the diary, everything there seemed sacred. But something bothered him. One detail made him feel that there was still something unrevealed. Rummaging through the bottom of the trunk once more, he found a smaller, crumpled envelope hidden beneath the loose lining of the lid. It wasn't sealed. It seemed forgotten or hastily hidden. Inside was a folded paper with a newspaper clipping dated January 1945. The title on the headline read, "Soldier Missing After Attack. Comrades Believe Captured." Lucas was in shock. Until then, all records and letters indicated that Konstantin had died or disappeared without a trace. But that article suggested another possibility. He was captured. There were reports from survivors of the ambush mentioned in the diary. Some claimed they saw him being taken away by enemy soldiers, wounded but conscious. The article was short, imprecise, but it raised an uncomfortable question. What if Konstantin hadn't died right after the battle? What if he had survived for months, maybe even years in captivity? That changed everything. Lucas searched military archives. He asked a war historian for help, and after days of searching, he found a name similar to Konstantin's in a document of prisoners registered in remote camps in Eastern Europe. The name was abbreviated K. Petrov. No confirmation of nationality, no date of death, but present on transfer lists until mid-1946. The form ended with a simple note, "Missing during evacuation in February 1946. Lucas took a deep breath. It was possible that Konstantin had survived the war, only to disappear again, alone, injured, perhaps trying to escape. The idea was distressing, but it also gave meaning to what Elena had said, that she never believed in her death, that I felt, instinctively, that he still existed somewhere. At that moment, Lucas understood. The true ending of this story was not Konstantin's death, nor Elena's silence, nor even the delivery of the last letter. The end was in their own resistance. One, writing without knowing if your words would be read. The other, waiting, even without guarantees that there was anything to wait for. Both, separated by the brutality of a world at war, but linked by a faith that many would call madness, but which was love in its rawest and purest form. Days later, Lucas returned to the nursing home to share his findings. Elena listened silently. When he finished, she closed her eyes and just said, "Then, it's true. He tried to go back. He never gave up on me." She didn't cry, smiled. A deep, calm smile, like someone who finally understands the whole story. Like someone closing a book, not because they want to forget, but because they finally understand. Lucas then took a new envelope out of his pocket. In it, he wrote in his own handwriting, "From Konstantin to Elena, delivered late, but never out of time." And he left all the letters there, on her table, the diary, the photo, all it was what was left of their story. And that was all that mattered. A few days later, Lucas received a call from the nursing home. Elena had passed away, peacefully, his sleep, with Konstantin's diary on his chest. The news hit him with sadness, but also with a strange sense of peace. She had left silently, yes, but completely. He had left with the words he had waited his entire life to hear. She left knowing that she was loved, and that her love was not in vain. Lucas decided that the story couldn't just be with him. He published an article, then a book, then created a short documentary. Thousands of people were moved. Many wrote their own letters, inspired by that story, as if Konstantin and Elena had left not just a memory, but a legacy. Because, in the end, what was left was more than a war story. It was proof that not all love needs to be lived to be eternal. And that, sometimes, the ending that no one expects is exactly the one that the heart needed. Time has its own ways. Sometimes he is cruel, relentless, crossing people's lives like a wind that takes everything away. But sometimes in rare and precious moments, time bends. Before what resists, memory, faith, ... love. Lucas understood this when he saw Elena's serene face, days after his departure. She had passed away peacefully, with Konstantin's diary resting on her chest, as if it were finally complete there, as if the last piece of a life had been placed in the right place. There was no hurt, regret, or longing on his face, just the expression of someone who, after waiting for so long, had finally been reached. She didn't leave alone. She left accompanied by every word written by Konstantin, by every promise made in the shadow of war, by every memory sealed with hope. And, more than that, she left carried by a love that was never buried, just postponed. Lucas, in turn, felt transformed. When he found the diary, all he wanted was to understand a story from the past. But what he experienced was more than understanding. It was participation. It was called Anne. He was tasked with something rare, giving a voice to those silenced by war, allowing letters, saved for decades, to finally reach their destination. Delivery was late, yes. It took Konstantin's words more than 70 years to touch Elena's heart. But when they arrived, still found a heart willing to listen. That, in itself, was a miracle. Not the miracle of changing the past, but of giving new meaning to the present, of giving meaning to the wait, of honoring the feeling, of sealing a story that never had an end, just silence. After Elena's death, Lucas was invited to speak at the funeral. The ceremony was simple but touching. He read excerpts from the diary, recounted the journey of the letters, and ended with the words Konstantin wrote in the sealed letter. "Read me as if I were there, lying next to you, as if my hands were between yours, as if there was still time to say what I never said. Because, somehow, there still is. There is still time to feel." The hall remained silent. Many people cried. Others just closed their eyes, not out of sadness, but out of reverence. This was no ordinary farewell. It was a celebration of something eternal. Konstantin and Elena's love had not been interrupted. He just hid from the world, waiting for the right moment to reappear. Lucas also discovered, after Elena's death, that she had left one last letter, handwritten, dated the same day she received his visit with the soldiers' letters. She asked that it be given to Lucas after his departure. The envelope was simple. Inside, just a sheet with a few words. "Dear Lucas, thank you for not letting our story die. You were the bridge between two souls who never stopped loving each other. My time here is over, but not his." Carry forward what he wrote. Show the world that there are words that cross time, and that, even when everything seems lost, there can still be a reunion. With eternal affection, Elena. Lucas held that letter as if he held both of their hearts. He knew his mission didn't end there. That story needed to be told. It was necessary to share it, because in a world of fleeting loves, empty promises, and disposable relationships, Konstantin and Elena's story was a powerful reminder. True love does not require presence. It requires permanence. So Lucas decided to turn everything into a book. So, in a documentary, and then into a memory space. A small local museum was created with the objects from the trunk, the letters, the diary, and the old photography. There, people could learn the history, and more than that, they could believe in the power of love. Again, next to the exhibition, a sign with the phrase, "Love doesn't have to arrive in time, it just needs to arrive." And so, even after death, even after oblivion, surrender took place, not with flowers or music, not with kisses or physical reunions, but with the certainty that two hearts, even separated by decades, they kept fighting for each other until the end. That was the last letter, but not the end of love. If this story touched your heart, as it touched those who had the privilege of discovering it, consider subscribing to the channel. Here you will find real and deep narratives that deserve to be remembered. Leave your like, it is our sign that these letters still find their way. And in the comments, write, "Love does not die in silence." This way, we will know that you were here until the end, felt every word, and honor with us this love that has stood the test of time.